Hello and welcome to Continuing Clockwise, a channel about games, gamers, and gaming. For this episode, we're going to talk about session prep, specifically prep for a campaign that's in its mid to late stages. We'll review my general session prep principles and then apply them to my own campaign. The late middle is a really tricky time for a campaign. You have a lot of history, you have a lot of things in play, a lot of characters, themes, and plot points have been introduced. And at the same time, you want to keep it efficient since the end is beginning to come into sight. You don't want to introduce more complexity. I've also found that some of my best ideas for a session come in the hours and minutes even before the session begins. So I might make some changes before we actually play. I'll be sure and catch you up on those next time. First, to recap. This campaign is largely rooted in the Out of the Abyss super module from Wizards of the Coast. If you remember, that one is centered around demon lords who have been summoned into the Underdark. My specific campaign also has elements from a lot of other different sources. My group has been tasked with gathering necessary components for a ritual, which will summon all of the demon lords into one location. Since demon lords hate everything, the assumption is that they will then fight each other, and the last remainder will be wounded and damaged, and primed for the player characters to swoop in and pick them off. All they have left is the grimoire that was used to cast the original spell, and that was done by the judge, who is the main antagonist for my campaign. In order to earn the judge's trust so they could have better access and an easier time of stealing his grimoire, they have actually joined forces with him and agreed to go on a quest to steal a void dragon egg. On their way out of his base to proceed on this quest, they rescued an Aarakocra named Rend. The judge had captured this Aarakocra and was presumably going to do nefarious dissection-y things to him. Most of my campaign has been on Halcyon, which is the name of the main portion of my setting. But the Void Dragons are rooted in Abulio, which is a pocket plane of about 100 miles in diameter. Halcyon and Abulio are connected to each other through the Underdark. Over the last two sessions, the characters have traveled to Abulio, journeyed to the Void Dragon Citadel, their lair, which is 5 miles above the Earth, right there on the edge of space. They snuck into the lair, defeated 2 Rakshasas. During that battle, the rest of the Citadel's occupants were alerted. They fought a Spectral Guardian, 2 Monolith Champions, and a Corpse Mound. All of those were from the Tome of Beasts by Kobold Press. Those battles didn't cause them too much trouble, but their resources are definitely dwindling. The group did some exploring, but actually went pretty directly to the main building, which they assumed correctly that the dragon would be in. All this time, Rend the Aarakocra was hiding in a little alcove. Aarakocras are CR 1/4 monsters. He's got like 12 hit points, and they are 13th level, so it's a good idea to keep him out of harm's way. When the group engaged the Void Dragon, they got nervous pretty quickly. During the course of the battle, the group's tiefling failed a save against a Aura of Madness, and he saved it by more than 5, which created a permanent insanity. I think that may have been the trigger, so the group decided to just grab the egg and get out of there without worrying about defeating the dragon. So the wizard teleported most of the group, so that's the tiefling bard who had gone crazy, the fighter, the rogue, and himself, the wizard, back to the tavern. And that left the druid, who was able to wild shape into an air elemental and fly away. On her way out, as the dragon was beginning to pursue her, she kind of hollered general instructions for Rend to follow them. But Rend was left to his own devices. Before I do anything else, it's time to apply my principles for session prep. The first principle is clarify the big picture. What are the bad guys doing and what do they want? This is also the appropriate time to consider what's happening in the world, what global events might affect the player characters. The second principle is to focus on what's next, but we'll talk more about that later. For this session, I know there's going to be 2 main things I need to consider. First, what is the Void Dragon doing? And then how am I going to handle that insane character that's just teleported into the middle of a tavern? Let's talk about the Void Dragon first. As I sort through what the dragon and her allies are going to do, I first need to just review who's left in that citadel and what are their abilities and powers. Looking at the Void Dragon, I noticed these dragons aren't the sneaky, charismatic kind. They're used to living in space, they're vastly intelligent, but in a way that's not comprehensible to mortals. So there's not a lot there when it comes to hunting or pursuing, or even charisma or talking or whatever. So I'm going to hold on to that. The next thing, as I'll show here, are the Mygo. So these are taken right from Lovecraftian stories, as I understand it. These guys are pretty weird, pretty strange, plant creatures. Again, a foreign alien intelligence that is not very comprehensible. There's nothing in there to indicate that they're hunters, that they have any scouting abilities. I think I'm going to also keep those on the back burner for now. I also realized that they never went into the mage's quarters. This mage is working for the Void Dragon, and the mage is in charge of security and kind of raising and educating the wormlings once those eggs hatch. So this is great because mages have spells, and that gives me a lot to work with. There's also a bit of a Schrodinger's cat situation here because the player characters never met this mage. So I can change a lot about what's in the room, what abilities they have, what spells they have available, because why not? I won't take that to a ridiculous degree, but that's still something I have a lot of elbow room for. So now thinking about that mage, I look at the stat block from the Monster Manual. Now as written, these spells are fairly combat focused, not bad, but most importantly I see that 5th level spell slot that they have. Now 5th level spells are really interesting, really powerful, so let's take a look there. My eye fell to Scrying. Now I wonder what Scrying is about. I've never used that, I'm not familiar with it in any of the editions, but it sounds pretty cool and it sounds like it might be really useful for a Void Dragon who's trying to find her egg. And looking into that Scrying spell, it looks like it would do the trick. A few things though, the Scrying spell is much more effective if there is a locket of hair or an item that used to belong to them or something along those lines. All right, so I'm gonna keep that in mind for later. That's gonna be an important thing. So that's the general snapshot of what's happened now. Now it's time to look forward. What are the next things that I need to think about? What is that dragon going to be doing? What is the mage going to be doing? How is that going to interact with Rend? I already took a look through that 5th level list, but what else? So you'll see here in the mage spell block, Suggestion. Now that's another spell I don't really know very well. I've never played a mage as a player character, and the mages that have appeared in my campaign that I've DM'd have mostly used magic missiles and other combat spells. So this is fun. So here's an opportunity for a mage to do something a little slower, a little more devious. Now back to that Suggestion spell, let's look that up. What's that do? And what would happen if the mage used Suggestion against the captured Aarakocra? Leaning towards having Rend be captured. I think that's the way I want to go. I think that's going to be a fun opportunity. You know, again, this poor guy is really out of his league. I think the mage is a CR 8. The dragon is a CR 14. He's pretty outclassed, so if he's going to be captured, I don't feel too bad about that. I also don't think that he's in a position to be very heroic. All right, so after some thought, I have a bit of a plan. First, the mage will come out and capture Rend. I need to think through a little bit about the details on that. I'm sure the player characters at some point will ask how that happened. I'm not overly concerned about it, but I need to have a story, and those are the things as a dungeon master that I have been caught by before. Some combination of the mage and the dragon capture Rend. You know, looking at those fly speeds, Rend is a pretty good flyer, so that's something to pay attention to, but the dragon is a better flyer, so that's helpful. If they get one of Rend's feathers and then send him back to his group, to his friends, they'll be able to spy on him using the Scry spell really effectively. And then the mage can use that Suggestion spell to tell either Rend to go back to his friends or not to mention the fact that he was captured. That sounds pretty good. And that sounds like it's a pretty appropriate use of the Suggestion spell. I like it. I like it. Now, realistically, I want to be honest about this. I don't believe that mage would have Scrying memorized. It's one thing to put it into her spell book. I think it would be a little cheap if I just assumed that she had it memorized. And if not, it's not a ritual. So I checked that. If only it was, that would just be add 10 minutes to the casting time. To do it fairly by the book, it would take 8 hours for the mage to have an extended rest to then memorize that Scrying spell. Okay, no big deal. I think the player characters are going to want to have an extended rest fairly soon anyway. So 8 hours plus, 5 minutes to memorize that 5th level spell, and then a few minutes to kind of capture Rend and do that interrogation. So, 9 hours from now, plus travel time. I feel pretty good about the plan for managing the mage and the dragon and all that nonsense. But now I need to think about, what am I going to do with that character who is now insane? So essentially, they have teleported into the middle of this tavern's dinner rush with an insane character. Looking at the stat block for the Void Dragon, this insanity really resembles the Confusion spell. Let's take a look at what that actually means. The Confusion spell is really designed for a combat situation. So you roll each round, and that's what the character does. And I can use that to an extent, but I'm not going to roll every 6 seconds to see what that character does. As I imagine what might happen if you're with an insane character who might wander off or attack people, I could imagine them wanting to grapple, right? That's a very natural thing to do if you're with someone who's not in the right mind. I'll need to have those grappling rules handy and ready to go. And I made a note of the rules. They're in the player's handbook on page 195. I can also imagine that they might try to calm the character. This fear effect was spawned by the dragon. So if the dragon's not there, the tiefling won't be afraid, but will still be insane. When this effect took place, the saving throw was a DC 18. That might be a good number for a skill check, maybe, for a persuasion or an intimidate or something, if the player characters want to just, calm this character. These are the short-term solutions, but I know that they're going to want to get that cured fairly soon. So doing a little bit more research, I think this will require a greater restoration. I just realized I should see if that's on the Druid spell list. It might be, or it might not be. So let me take a look. They might just pay a non-player character to do it as well. So I did a little bit of research there, and there aren't any rules as written or even really official recommendations for prices. But I did see some Adventurers League content that suggests a greater restoration will cost 450 gold. At this point, again, 13th level, 14th level, 450 gold is nothing. I'm sure they have that much money. That's not an issue. It seems actually a little cheap to me, but fine. I'm not going to overdo that. But that does tell me that for this prep, I'm going to need to think about who would be able to cast that spell. What would that non-player character look like? What church would it be? I know there's a Raven Queen temple at their base, the Skyreach Castle. They might go back there. That's a very real possibility. Their rogue also contacted the Thieves Guild when they went through this town previously, so I'll need to think through some details around that. And really, when I say think through those details, I just need to have a few non-player characters set and ready to go to guide that through. I don't think that'll need to be an extensive part of next session. The next thing I need to do is make sure that I have a good sense for what the tavern looks like, who's going to populate it. I think I might have a group of dwarves present. We have a few dwarf characters already, and one of them is from nearby, so that could be a fun connection. Maybe they're cousins of his or neighbors or something who already judge him harshly. It just brings to mind in Lord of the Rings, I can't remember their names, but they're those grumpy hobbits who are always frowning at Frodo and Bilbo. So I could have a dwarf equivalent there in the tavern. That could be fun. This might be a place where I pull out a poster map. I love using poster maps, even though there probably won't be combat. I have to balance that. It might be fun from an immersion perspective just to have that really clearly visualized. So those were the two most important things. So I know what the dragon is going to do, and I know what's going to happen to Rend. I know what's going to happen with Arinya. Arinya is the tiefling. I don't know what the player characters will do. It's possible. However, I think unlikely that they will return to the judge's base at this stage. And that's also just something I needed to think through anyway. So what is the judge doing during this time? It occurs to me that one of the things about the judge is that he has allies. He gathers allies, he recruits them. He doesn't have a firm hierarchy. He's in charge. But he uses other people to accomplish what he needs. So I looked through the Princes of the Apocalypse super module because that's the home base that I'm using for the judge, is that mega dungeon. And I looked through the non-player characters and monsters to see who might the judge reach out to that is already at hand to find out who stole Rend. The judge suspects that the player characters did it, but he doesn't really know that yet. And so I found Gar Shatterkeel. And here is his stat block. And this is a character the players have not met yet. And right there, he has access to that scrying spell. So I think it would be very reasonable to assume that the judge could find a feather of Rend. The players didn't do anything to prevent that from happening. That's easy enough, I think. And then they could scry, and I think it would even be safe to assume that they have scryed on Rend just during this time. What that tells me is over the last few days, they have been scryed upon, and the judge knows that Rend is with the player characters. Nice. What would the judge do then? So he's going to keep close tabs on them, and I can imagine him waiting for them when they arrive back at the home base. And so here I'm thinking about what would that look like? What would the judge require? And I have to admit, I've been watching a lot of Walking Dead lately. I really enjoy that show quite a lot. And the character Negan reminds me of the judge a little bit. So Negan is a little more organized and has a little bit higher of a belief system about why he does the awful things that he does. The judge is not that way. The judge has no delusions that he's the good guy. But at the same time, he likes a certain amount of order. He doesn't actually kill for killing's sake. So what I can imagine the judge will want to do is just punish who's guilty. So he'll want Rend back the judge will demand that whoever stole him be punished. And by punished, some sort of either captivity or a next dissection or something. Player characters won't go for that. That'll probably be where communications break down. But at least that'll help me run the discussion. So what I'm imagining now is that the judge will greet the characters when they arrive. There's the red dragon that a different one of the player characters antagonized. So I can imagine that we'll have Gar, we'll have the judge, we'll have the red dragon who has a name, I just don't remember what it is. That'll be a pretty good party. And the stats that I'm using for the judge are pretty high up. So the idea is if the group learns his true name, that's a whole other thing that we'll be pursuing. He'll be a very reasonable power. If they don't, he's like a CR14 or something, so not really manageable for them, but that would be fun. So that's how I'm imagining that. If they do go back, I have a good plan for what that interaction would look like. So that's my baseline prep. The other thing I need to keep in mind is if the player characters do get Rend back and do want to go with him to see his elders in Halcyon, the elders know what the judge's true name is. So I need to think that through a little bit. What would that look like? What would travel look like? I don't think that'll be a major thing, but I'll have to look at my Tomb of Annihilation super module to make sure I'm prepared for that. All right, so that's it for now. I still have a few more things to tighten up before the session, but I think I'm in pretty good shape. I will let you guys know. So my plan now is to run the next session and take some notes and take some video and then do a report back. Reflect on what part of this prep was useful and what wasn't, and what am I saving for next time. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and please consider subscribing. Until next week, happy gaming.